So, our topic today is tips for teaching English online. So, first of all, this is tips. It's not how to teach English online because there's so much we could talk about. This is just a free info session on, some tips for teaching English online. I train the teachers at English Fokus as well as teach a number of English classes there. So first of all, teaching online is not just sending YouTube videos to students. I've been surprised how many people think, oh, yeah, online learning is boring. Yeah, we just watch YouTube videos. I'm like, yeah, really? Yeah, right. Online learning is much more than just watching YouTube videos or just giving assignments for students to do as homework. The more accurate term for that would be distance learning or independent learning, where you're learning learning by yourself. So teaching online is not just doing assignments, but teaching online can be interactive. It can be productive. There are some advantages actually of teaching online in which we can actually look at, everybody is looking at the same screen at the same time. There are also a lot of disadvantages. So we're not here to talk about all the advantages and disadvantages because obviously those of us who are teachers are stuck to teaching online. So we're going to make the best of it and do the best that we can with it. So today's focus, we're going to look at three main things. First of all, practical tips. Secondly, some teaching tips for doing speaking and listening activities. And last of all, managing the classroom and keeping students focused. So first of all, just some practical tips. Number one is definitely the most important, and that is know how to use your teaching software. Okay, so there's lots of different software out there. You can use Zoom, Microsoft has Microsoft Teams, Google has Google Hangouts, and Google Classroom. The list goes on. I'm not an expert on all the different types of teaching software, but whichever one you're using, make sure that you know how to use it. And practice without students first, okay? If you're using Zoom, like we're using today, you can open up an empty classroom and do screen share your materials, and practice using the different features of Zoom. That way, when you're actually doing it with students, you're not like, what do I do now? You already have some experience and you're familiar. Where's the mute button? How do I share screen? How do I share my audio? I need the whiteboard. Let's see, I can't find the whiteboard. Yeah, so take care of those glitches before you even start teaching online. I'm not going to go through all the features of Zoom or online software. You can watch YouTube tutorials. There's plenty out there as far as what you need to know and how to use the software. Even the software itself has lots of videos that you can use. One practical tip I have is make your class time shorter, because attention span is much shorter for online classes. It's easy for students to get distracted. But my advice would be keep your classes to probably around 1 hour, 60 minutes, or maybe even shorter, depending what you're doing, just because it's really easy to lose your students. At the start of class, plan something informal, flexible, either some small talk. I often discuss homework with my students from the previous lesson. So don't plan the most important part of your lesson right away at the beginning. You might have to re-explain it later, similar to as you are in the real classroom, students come in late, you're dealing with the same issues. Okay, some basic tips for Zoom. This one's probably the most important, is you mute participants when they aren't talking. So right now, you all are muted, and I could unmute you, but if I would want to have a discussion, but there's so much background noise happening with your child. I have a child next door with maybe there's sounds coming from the village, the chickens, whatever that's outside. So if your students aren't talking, use the mute feature. Use the chat feature. So the chat feature is really handy if you need to communicate with people during the class. You can use this to everyone in the meeting. So right now I'm going to send you a chat. Hey, and we just got one. So hi from me to everyone. Okay, so the chat feature is a great way to be able to communicate without interrupting the meeting. So like right now, I can just keep on talking, I can keep on teaching, but if you have a question, you can post it on there. So I already see someone said, hello, that's great. You can also message privately. So you can send me a private message, I can send you a private message as well, depending on what settings the host of the meeting has set, because I'm the host. So I can disable private messaging or I can enable it. For this session, private messaging is enabled, so you can send me a private message. So yeah, I use this. Sometimes I can't hear. It's like, what was that word? Yeah, the pronunciation wasn't clear. I mean, that's difficult enough in the classroom, let alone on a video chat. So use a chat feature where you can type something out to make it more clear. I suggest when you screen share just to use one particular screen. So like right now I'm screen sharing PowerPoint. So nothing else on my computer is showing except for my PowerPoint screen. And I'm going to show you that. Also use the annotate features and the whiteboard. Let me demonstrate that here. So here's a screenshot from screen share. So if you were in Zoom and you click on your menu bar, you would click screen share. And when this comes up, you're going to see different things that you can choose as far as what to share. You can choose your desktop, you can choose Microsoft PowerPoint, or different programs. So you just choose one to share, and then down here, you click share. If you are sharing audio, you need to click this box in the bottom left-hand corner where it says share computer sound. So if you're doing listening activities for your students, or you're playing a video off of YouTube or off of your computer, make sure that you use this feature of share computer sound. The audio will come through much clearer. And I'll give you a demonstration of this when we get to the tips on teaching listening. Then there's the annotate feature in Zoom, which I just did. I use an arrow. You can use text. And so if you're doing a screen share, you'll see a picture like this on your screen. And you click on annotate, which is right up here at the top. And then down here in the bar, you have text, you have draw, different features that you can use. So if I'm doing text, I can just say, I can put some text right in here. Hi, this is Daniel. If I change my feature to drawing, I can draw a line and highlight here. This is where you click on annotate for this annotate bar to come up. After you're finished, then you just come here to the clear button and you clear your annotations, and then you can move on. Okay, so those are just some practical tips. Moving on to tips for teaching speaking and listening activities. So teaching online is very similar to teaching in the classroom as far as the basic skills that you need to have an effective lesson in the classroom also are going to apply to have an effective lesson online, albeit a few things are different, but it's the same basic skills. So if you have a well-planned lesson, you have a clear objective, you know what you're teaching your students, and you have it broken down and you're ready to go with your clear lesson plan with good materials, interesting materials, pictures, the content is suitable to the needs of the students, it's engaging, you're gonna have a fairly good lesson. Maybe not quite as easy as in the classroom. Online is going to be a little bit more difficult, but you still need to have good content and good pedagogy. The third tip here is plan activities that don't require a lot of instructions or explanations. So my advice is choose more simple activities for online. Okay, let's look at speaking activities first. Of course, remember your objective. Why are you doing this speaking activity? Are you teaching a particular grammar point? Are you teaching a particular structure, a pronunciation, a particular function, how to decline requests, how to accept requests, etc. Okay, so think about, what's the purpose of your speaking activity? And here are just a few sample speaking activities that I listed that I thought, hey, these are ones you do in the classroom, but they could still work online. So you can still do brainstorming. You can stick up a picture and say, well, what if we would do, what do you think about this? Or you give someone a statement and say, what would you do if you had 1 million rupiah free? So those are different things that, you could do there. Brainstorming, describe pictures. So stick up a picture and describe it so that, that's engaging. Have each student say, what do they notice? That can be a good intro activity there. Question and answer. So this is a really popular way to engage students for online classes. It's much harder to just have an open discussion. Everyone's like, who's gonna talk? I don't know, especially in a larger class setting. So it's good if you have a clear question, and even having a clear person who is going to answer it is very helpful. You can do show and tell. This would be especially good for younger students. I mean, adults can do this too, but especially for elementary, this applies to the classroom too. The more objects that you have, the better. So if you're doing something on colors for a really, really basic lesson, have students find objects in their own house, in their own room, that have those particular colors or that have something related to your lesson. So get them active. They don't have to just be at the screen, the computer screen or phone screen the whole time. Get them up and about, give them a list of things they need to find. We call that a scavenger hunt. So show and tell. They can come prepared to do this. So they have to bring something and you give them an assignment that they have to tell about it beforehand, and then they present.
So the first thing is just, I really appreciate what you said, Daniel, about sometimes nominating the person who should speak, because especially when we're brainstorming, there's many reasons why someone might not speak yet. Maybe they're thinking, maybe they're shy, maybe they're looking at their face or distracted or something.
Yeah.
So it's good if we can say their name and say, hey, Anita, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? Or, hey, Zafira, what is your opinion on whatever? So I think that can also help everyone else so they don't all start speaking at the same time.
Okay, another speaking activity that you could do is storytelling. So I picked speaking activities here that are more one-on-one, because it's going to be much harder to have pair work where everyone's doing their own speaking activity, because you can't have it all happening at once like you would in a normal classroom. So I think we need to focus more on one-on-one type of speaking activities. So have students tell a story. And it's important that all students are active though. So even the students who are listening, they need an assignment to keep them engaged. And we're going to talk about this on the listening slides, is that, students can't just be passive. They need to have an assignment of something that they're listening for. So if someone is telling a story, well, then you're going to require them to answer questions about the story or to summarize the story at the end. And they know that the teacher could call on any of them at any time, and they're going to have to talk. And if you establish that culture in the online classroom, then it'll keep your students engaged, because nobody likes to be called on and then they're like, I forget. I wasn't paying attention. We've all had that happen. It's really embarrassing. Another activity is information gap. And there's lots of different types of information gap activities. It's anything, any kind of speaking activity in which one person has information that the other person does not have. Now, to do this, you might need to give materials to your students ahead of time. Yeah, so certain students have certain information and other students have other information. So we'll talk a little bit about information sharing at the end, because that's a very practical logistic that you need to talk about. How do we get materials to our students? But information gap is often done with finding differences between the pictures or obtaining missing information. Here's an example of an information gap activity. So here we have 2 apartments. So in this case, you would give one apartment to maybe half of your students in the class, and one apartment to the other half of your students in their class. And they would not be able to see each other's apartment. And you could have them ask each other different questions. So in this activity, we're practicing there is or there are. So we could say, are there any sofas in your living room? How many chairs are in your kitchen? What color is your kitchen table? And so they're learning to make differences, and then they can summarize them. In Rachel's apartment, there are 3 chairs in the kitchen, but in Bill's apartment, there are 4 chairs in the kitchen. Okay, so we have a structure that we're practicing, and students are finding the differences. And there's a lot that you can do with a picture like this. You could just do freestyle talking. You could put up the picture just like this and have them compare the differences as well. But most importantly, yeah, you're gonna have to prepare ahead of time and make sure that students have these materials in order to be able to do that. But that's just a sample of an information gap activity. I love information gap even in the classroom, but online they're great too. You might just have to split your class half and half instead of all the students doing it maybe in pair work. Okay, let's look at teaching listening. And I broke listening down into 3 different sections here. So before, during, and after, or pre-listening, while listening, post-listening. So listening and speaking obviously are skills that are very interrelated, because if one person is speaking, the other person is listening. But listening skills are probably the most important skills that you need, because if you can't understand what somebody is saying, how are you going to reply in order to tell them what they need to hear? So in teaching listening, which I think online classes are a great opportunity to teach listening, because everybody has their own computer, their own phone right in front of them, and their own microphone. And so should be able to practice with your students and make sure that it works, but should be a great opportunity to be able to practice listening skills, which I think many times we don't do enough of in the classroom. Before you do a listening activity, as in before you do really any kind of teaching activity, make sure you introduce what students need to know. So introduce the necessary grammar or vocabulary that they need to understand that particular section. Do a hook, yeah, an intro activity to activate the learner's interest and their prior knowledge. So we could do some brainstorming. We can look at a picture, a video, or a question and see what they know about it. I'll stick up an example here in just a minute. While they're listening, students should not be passive. They should have a goal. So they should have a task that they need to complete. So they could be taking notes, filling in blanks. Once again, this is something that a material that you've provided to them beforehand. They have to answer a question, or maybe they have to summarize what they hear. So I just pulled a book from one of our, a picture, a listening activity just from one of our textbooks. So a pre-listening activity that you could do for something like this is to direct students' attention to the picture, and maybe only show them the picture. Don't show them the dialogue. Show them the picture and ask, hey, you know, what do you think they're doing? Who are these people? And if they look in the background, they're going to see Japanese food. They're going to see karaoke. They're going to see Cafe Roma, and they might guess, oh, maybe they're talking about what they're going to do, or maybe they're talking about where they're going to eat. These type of activities, they seem really simple, but they're really important in activating students' knowledge and getting them thinking about the topic. Because for all we could care, students might be thinking about their friend. They might be thinking about what they're going to eat. They might be thinking about the fact that they're hungry, or some totally other random topic. And so when we do a warm-up activity, a pre-listening activity, we're focusing students' attention on, hey, what's the topic about? This one's about eating, yeah, not going to the zoo or something totally different. While listening, so this dialogue has two parts to it. While listening, give them a question to do. Okay, so here they had the first part of the dialogue that they could practice. Then in part B, they have listened to the rest of the conversation. So for listening to the rest of the conversation, they can have something that they're going to be focusing on as they're doing it. So I will play the rest of the conversation here for you, and you need to answer the question. Where do they decide to have dinner?
Page Part B. Listen to the rest of the conversation. Where do they decide to have dinner?
So what about dinner? I'm hungry.
Have you tried Sakura? They have excellent sushi.
Actually, I had Japanese food for lunch.
Well, how about Italian food? Cafe Roma is a great place, and it isn't far.
That's fine with me. I love Italian food.
Okay, so the question there was, where do they decide to have dinner? And if you were listening, they decided to have dinner at Cafe Roma to have Italian food. Okay, so that's an example of an activity that you can do while they're listening. So they're not just, okay, I'm just trying to understand, but they have a specific question that they're trying to answer. And you can listen to the recording a couple different times in order to do that. After you're done listening, then we can ask more comprehension questions. So what other places did they discuss that they wanted to eat? Or we can have a discussion. Do you enjoy going out to eat? How often do you go out to eat? Okay, you can evaluate, do you agree, do you disagree? You can explain the meanings of different words. You can explain different linguistic structures. In this particular listening, it was actually focusing on present perfect. We didn't point that out, but we could have, because the grammar point then was present perfect. We could even put up the audio transcript afterwards, and students could look at it directly, and the teacher could explain it if they wanted to see it. Okay, so that was just one example. But yeah, the main thing there that I encourage you to is, if you're doing listening, choose a task to keep students focused. So they're not just passively listening, but yeah, they have a question that they have to answer as they are listening. And you as a teacher are going to call on them and say, hey, where did they have dinner? And they need to be ready to answer. Okay, these are some sample listening activities. Once again, listening is very intertwined, very similar to speaking. So a lot of the things on the speaking activities slides would also apply to listening. But in addition, you can do TPR activities. So TPR stands for total physical response. So if you're doing TPR is just, basic commands. And so you're listening, let's say I'm giving commands to elementary children, okay? So if we all know Simon Says, it can be, Simon says, touch your right ear. Okay, everybody touch your right ear. Okay, and I can see all of you right now, so I can see, which ones are and which ones are. And okay, touch your left ear. Yeah, touch your nose. So even though you aren't talking to me, you're still active, you're engaged. And so our goal is to have an active classroom, and TPR is one way to do that, where they can point to things, they can raise their hand, they can touch something, they can, try to make a symbol, whatever. So yeah, think of TPR activities as one thing that you can do. Yeah, true false listening. So you listen to something and then give them statements afterwards. Is it true or false? Dictation, where you say a sentence and they have to copy it down. So dictation skills are they're not a really popular method, but they're a very effective method to check listening comprehension with students. Don't do a lot of it, just do a couple sentences at a time, but it's one thing that you could possibly do. And then you could put up what you were dictating afterwards up on the screen, and they can check their answers. If you're teaching a higher level, more academic class, maybe you might have talks or lectures or a video program or something that you're listening to, and have discussion questions that go with it that you could follow. Giving instructions. So once again, if you're wanting students to follow something on a map or whatever, you have materials ahead of time. If you're have a textbook that students are using, you can give them instructions and they can carry out those instructions in the book or on the materials that they already have. Of course, one of the most popular ones that people do is directions. So you have a map and you tell them, hey, put your finger on the gas station, okay? Go on Main Street 2 blocks and turn left on Maple Street. And students can follow it. And then at the end, okay, where are you? And you can see if they're correct or not. Make sure they were following along.
Just a quick question about the dictation. How would you check that they actually wrote what you said?
Yes, so that would be something that would be a little bit difficult, where you wouldn't be able to assess probably all their work individually in an easy way. You would have to have them checking it against the copy that you give them, unless you would have them submit it.
They could hold it up, couldn't they, to the camera, and you could glance and see that they got 5 sentences, even if you couldn't tell the words were perfect. Like you could see at least that they tried.
Yes, they could do that. They could do that. If you were doing it with more tech-savvy students, they could type it on a Word document and they could just share that Word document with you. And so they could be typing. They could even type it in the chat too. So yeah, it all depends on how tech-savvy your students are. Go ahead.
May I say one more idea? Just came to me. In the olden days when people had the blackboard slates, they would write on it with the chalk. You could do that if you had any kind of large writing implement. Like nowadays we have whiteboards. So if you were lucky enough to have a whiteboard, or this child had one, or something they could draw on with big writing, they could write small answers and then just show it. And then that would be a visual engagement as well. Like they wouldn't even have to speak even. You could speak and they could write and they could show, depending on, if they have a stand for their harpe, or anyway, depending on what you have, they could do that.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So yeah, we have to kind of decide how much our students are capable of doing to teach them when it comes to the tech world. For one of my online classes, my student does the annotating on his phone, actually. And so we do TOEFL structure activities, and we have sentences up, and he goes through the sentences and does the exercises. So he underlines them, he circles, he writes correct, incorrect, and such like. And we work together as a team. So even as he's doing the assignments, I'm correcting him on the fly, because I can also annotate. So we're working on the same document at the same time. And if the host enables it, the students are also able to annotate. So yeah, if your students are tech savvy and you want to take the time to teach them to do that, then yeah, it's a great idea. And you can all be working on the same whiteboard at the same time, everybody typing. It'll take a little bit of learning, but it is possible. Okay, just a few basic tips here at the end for managing the online classroom. Be in charge. Know what your plan is, what's next, and don't be shy. Call on students to talk. It's going to be hard, especially depending on what age you're teaching, to get students just to volunteer to talk, because you can't make direct eye contact with them. You can't just gesture at them and say, okay, your turn. But yeah, so that's a really, really important point, is that as we're teaching online, we need a way to stay connected to students for announcements, for file sharing. So the suggestions that I put up here are email, Google Drive. So Google Drive is an online place to store your files. There's OneDrive, there's Dropbox. So there's a number of different ones that you could use there, but you could use something like that and you share the link. Students don't have to have an account. They could just download it from the link that you provide. You could share the materials on WhatsApp. The other option is you give them physical materials. So if they already have a textbook that you're using for a particular course, I think that can make it really easy because they already have the materials right in front of them. It's like a double screen. So they can be working, they can actually be writing in their textbook. And for you to be able to show them what they're supposed to do, you can have a screenshot or a picture of that textbook on your screen. So you can be showing them on your screen, okay, we're at exercise 2 right here, and they can be working in their books, following along. I mean, the other option is materials packets. If your students are close by, maybe you can prepare the materials for them. Here's your materials for 2 weeks or for 1 month, and they come pick up the materials, or you use Gojek and send the materials to them or something like that, if they're close by. Now, there might be some limitations to that, but that is a possibility. So just some basic things on keeping students focused. Most importantly, yeah, good content. So keep students focused by teaching in a skillful and engaging manner. So obviously, if the pedagogy is good, the materials are good, students are going to be more engaged. So that's the #1 rule of classroom management, is good content and the content delivered in a skillful and engaging manner. Now, of course, we're still going to have problems. So we also need to eliminate distractions. So during this session, I muted some people because they were making noise and didn't know it. Okay, so let's just get rid of that distraction. If there's videos that are distracting, you as the host, just mute the video, turn it off, because you can do that as a host. Because everyone's busy watching, so-and-so cooking in their kitchen instead of looking at the teacher. So you have to think, what are the distractions that people are looking at? And with a larger group, like a group this size, it's honestly really hard for me because I can't look at all my screens at once to see all of your videos, as well as the screen that I'm teaching off of, and the chat screen, and managing my controls all at the same time for a big class. I use double screen. I have 2 desktops open right now, which makes it a little bit easier. I can see my notes, I can see my PowerPoint, and I can see most of you all on video at the same time. So that's one tip. Yeah, if you have a double monitor, use it. It works great. Set clear regulations and procedures. So just like you have rules in your classroom, you still need rules online. Okay, can students text on their cell phone during class? What is your rule on that? Do they no cell phones allowed? Turn taking, who talks when? So do you have rules for, hey, do they raise their hand like this if they want to talk? Do they use the raise your hand feature in Zoom? Can they interrupt you at any time? Yeah, so you need to set those expectations for your students. Obviously, the larger the class, the more difficult. I personally would not want to teach an online class with more than 6 to 8 students. It's harder to be interactive, if I had a choice. But we don't always have choices in how we do things. But yeah, have rules. Like for this presentation, I said, yeah, pretty much hold your questions until the end. We'll have some interaction, but just to keep things flowing smoothly, type it in the chat. And that's what we'll do. That way it eliminates extra distractions. And I already mentioned muting participants' video or audio if needed. And if you have a really bad student, kick them out of the video classroom. So you can boot them and you can allow them to join again, but it's kind of like digital punishment. Yeah, you can still punish the student and send them out of the classroom. And everybody knows. So yeah, you choose your rules and how you want to do it, but think about those dynamics. It's going to be different for each of you depending on who your students are, but address them and set up procedures that work to minimize those distractions.